Hi there, members and friends of Mount Pleasant and other folk watching too. I hope you and your families are keeping well and you're staying free from the symptoms of this coronavirus. In a moment, I want to encourage you to open your Bible to John chapter 10. So do go and find yourself a Bible and then open it to John chapter 10. And I want to read some verses in that passage. Let me tell you a couple of other things as well. Obviously, our ministry in Mount Pleasant, Blackwood, is somewhat restricted at the moment. We're not able to physically meet together, as you know, but many of our ministries are still carrying on in all sorts of different ways. We're keeping in touch with people through the phone, by emails, by these videos. We have regular prayer videos as well, a number of times during the week. So I hope you're joining in with that too. Now, some of you during this lockdown have been experiencing what you'd regard as the normal moments in life, celebrating birthdays. And some of you have had some special ones recently, haven't you? I look forward to sharing cake with you, by the way. Your pictures have whet my appetite, although I'd rather actually have the cake. So hopefully that'll happen at some point. Of course, there are those of you who've lost loved ones too, and our heart goes out to you as we remember you in our prayers. A good number of people have been praying for you. These are some of the joys and sorrows of what bind us together as a family, a church family. And many of you going the extra mile at this time, looking out for one another. I want to thank you for doing that. Okay, so let's open the Bible, shall we, for a few moments and think about what Jesus says about himself in John chapter 10. I want to read from verse 1. Perhaps you'd like to read along with me, as this is an incident that talks about access to God and the provision from God. So, let's read from John chapter 10, verse 1, where Jesus speaks and says, "Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice." Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and they know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep." John chapter 10, verses 1 to 15. Have you heard that there's currently a list of key workers published by the government? Many jobs and professions are on that list that you'd expect, and many of those that we've clapped for or cheered for across the country each Thursday evening at 8 p.m. are the people that are on that list, key workers. Thankfully, there's not a contrasting list of despised workers, but if there were, I wonder if you'd expect shepherds to be on it. Probably not. After all, you're probably not particularly thinking of shepherds unless you come from a rural or farming community. You probably don't give shepherds much thought at all. And if you did, you probably wouldn't expect them to be on a despised workers list. I certainly wouldn't. Some of my best friends are shepherds. Okay, not really. But I'm sure shepherds are nice people, hard-working, along with all those who work on the land and in the farming sector. Where would we be without them? But why mention them if we're so unfamiliar with them, if they're not part of our normal life? Well, Jesus spoke about being a good shepherd in this passage in John chapter 10. Did you spot it? And it's an image of him that many folk love. The picture of him carrying a stricken sheep, the image of him rescuing one stuck in a thorn bush or down a ravine. It's a picture of someone who cares, even loves, who works hard, who works sacrificially. These are the pictures of Jesus that we love. But hang on, we modern urban Westerners can have a far too sentimental picture of shepherds. The truth is that being a shepherd, especially in ancient times, was an arduous and dangerous job. A task for what you might call roughnecks rather than refined individuals. And in the time of Jesus, shepherds were very much on the despised occupations list. They were on the fringes of society, on the margins of communities, routinely considered dishonest and untrustworthy, ritually barred from worship, not able to enter the temple or the synagogue. So it's a bit startling then, isn't it, that Jesus presents himself as the Good Shepherd. Why would he do that? Well, it's a figure of speech. That's what it says in the passage in verse 6. Jesus used a figure of speech, a bit like a parable. And from the context of the first century, he's using the image of sheep, shepherds, sheepfolds to say something about himself. Where at one moment he is a shepherd, and at another moment he is a gate for the sheep. Although perhaps it's worth noting that those two images can, in a sense, form one picture, as shepherds would often at night lie across the entrance to the sheepfold to protect the flock, a bit like a gate. The picture Jesus presents here is of being a shepherd in verse 11 and a gate in verse 7. He is the access, the door, the gate to God, and he is the shepherd, the provider from God. So this is a passage about access to God and provision by God. At one level, Jesus is just describing the realities of sheep keeping in the first century. Shepherds would have their own flock, and the sheep would indeed recognise their voice, as it says in verse 4. They sometimes had their own little flute that they would play at a certain pitch so that their herd would recognise them. They sometimes even named their sheep. The sheep would recognise and respond to the particular shepherd's voice. But this is more than just a story. There is a specific point. For Jesus is wanting to explain that he is emphatically the good shepherd, in contrast to the dodgy and unreliable, selfish shepherd leaders that the people had been used to. There had been a whole range of false shepherds, prophets, priests and kings, the symbolic shepherds. They behaved more like butchers than shepherds, living off people rather than for people, and using them for their own ends. When the leaders had failed, Jesus is saying he will step in and be the shepherd himself. Ezekiel chapter 34 presents a picture of God as the shepherd. God, unable to rely on others, assumes direct responsibility for the vulnerable, frightened and injured flock. Ezekiel chapter 34 verse 11 gives this wonderful description. For this is what the sovereign Lord says, I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. As a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he is with them, so I will look after my sheep. The passage goes on, talks about what God will do. I will rescue them. I will bring them out. I will pasture them. I will tend them. I will bind up the injured, strengthen the weak. I will shepherd the flock with justice. Read verses 11 to 16. God is himself declaring that he will shepherd his people, and now Jesus is declaring that he will be the good shepherd, in a sense claiming these words from the prophet Ezekiel for himself. Jesus is describing himself as the good shepherd, if you like, the true shepherd, the one who had intimate knowledge of his sheep. Also note in verse 9 his unique provision for his sheep. His provision as a shepherd is to be the gateway. So verse 9, I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The privileges of the sheepfold are available to all who enter. Entering into God's fold means exercising faith in him, placing total trust in him, giving our allegiance to him. Not hedging our bets with some portfolio of religious faith options, wisdom of other people and other faith, stars and signs and star signs, money markets, pension providers, state solutions, or the wisdom of the latest YouTube or Instagram star. No. Giving our allegiance and entering into the sheepfold is not the placing our risk in Jesus, but putting our trust in Jesus. For he is the one that promises to give life in all its fullness, life here and now and for all eternity. Life with a capital L-I-F-E. Along with his unique provision for the sheep, I think perhaps the highlight of this passage is to see his voluntary sacrifice for his sheep. Now, a true shepherd is prepared to take risks and even give up their life for the sake of their sheep. This is the ultimate definition, if you like, of a good shepherd. And Jesus announces that he's going to do just that, lay down his life for his sheep. The idea seems strange to us, and in fact, he repeats it so that we don't miss it. See if you could spot the repetition in the passage. It's a way of him emphasizing that when he eventually surrenders to death, he does so not because he is forced into it by others, but because it is voluntarily offered. He gives himself. And in this way, the benefits he bestows on the sheep are won for us. The glory of the shepherd lies in his sheer loving, self-sacrificial goodness. And the glory of God is seen radiating from him in the way he seeks the lost, brings back the strays, binds up the injured, strengthens the weak, and does so at the cost of his own life. Jesus is the good shepherd, the provision of God, and the door, the access to God. And our role? Well, we are to be respondents, hearing and knowing the voice of the shepherd, following as he leads, following where he goes. John chapter 10 is a wonderful interpretation of the illustration famously presented in Psalm 23. You probably know Psalm 23. But have you heard it this way? Christ is my shepherd, I shall not want. Christ makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters, for Christ refreshes my soul. Christ guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for Christ is with me. Christ has prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life in his name. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord Jesus Christ forever. Jesus is the fulfillment of Psalm 23. Jesus is the Lord my shepherd. He is the good shepherd and the gate. In other words, he is the one who provides for us, and he is the one who enables us to have access to God. And those two things come together in his sacrificial and voluntary death upon the cross. Through that, we are enabled to have access to God and see God's provision for us, which is Jesus himself, the Good Shepherd. He is to be celebrated, Celebrate Jesus today. If you want to know more about the passage or anything else about the Christian faith, do just drop me a line or send me a message. It'd be lovely to hear from you. Use the comments box below or find a way of emailing me. I'd be happy to hear from you and I'll make sure I reply. Now, normally we finish our services on a Sunday with a song or with a hymn, so I want to leave you with something for you to sing or hum along to. I've done that in previous weeks and there's going to be a link below. So click on the link and you'll find a hymn courtesy of Stuart Townend. I'm quite sure that it'll lift your spirits, it'll draw you closer to the Lord, and I guarantee that you'll know the words. They're inspired by this passage and by the psalm that I mentioned, and I'm sure that if you sing along, and I do encourage you to do that, then you'll find yourself worshipping God and celebrating Jesus. So enjoy that, and until I see you again, take care and God bless.